I still remember the first time I realized something was off. It was a crisp autumn evening in Oxford, leaves raining down like confetti, as I prepared for my sister's engagement party in our family's centuries-old garden courtyard. My name is Helena Braithwaite, and this is my story. All my life, I'd been the study-obsessed younger sister, buried in archives and ancient texts, while my elder sister, Seraphine, glided through life on a breeze of charm and privilege. She was the golden child, chief bridesmaid to every debutante, heiress to our family's modest estate, and the darling of every social circle in town. Me? I was the one who stayed home, cataloging dusty ledgers and mapping the family tree back to the Norman conquest. But that evening, standing by the lantern-lit fountain, I felt something cold settle in my chest. The guests, clad in emerald and sapphire gowns, laughed and danced around tables groaning under the weight of crystal flutes and silver platters. A quartet played a lilting waltz near the ivy-covered archway. Everything was perfect. Too perfect. I'd arrived early, clutching a notebook and pen, ostensibly to help with last-minute seating arrangements. Yet something told me I was acting on autopilot. Seraphine always needed an extra pair of hands, and I was her shadow. As I stepped behind the silk-draped trellis to fetch more place cards, I saw it. A small, black device strapped to the underside of one of the tables, blinking faintly like a diabolical firefly. My heart hammering, I crouched and carefully extracted the gadget. It was sleek, no bigger than my palm, clearly designed for surveillance. I recognized the brand, Phantom Eye Labs, a boutique security firm that only sold its wares to the wealthiest clients. My pulse thundered. Seraphine knew something I didn't. A cold realization washed over me. This was no innocent celebration. It was a trap. I strained to listen. Voices drifted through the trellis. The soft soprano of Lady Cantrell praising Seraphine's beauty. The hushed whispers of our cousin Henrietta, speculating about the upcoming merger of our family's antique business with a Swiss investment group. Somewhere, Seraphine's fiancé, Lord Everett Shaw, was laughing, probably boasting about his connections to the Duke of Devonshire. They all believed they were safe, hidden beneath polite smiles and clinking champagne glasses. But as I slid the recorder into my coat pocket, I swore I would give them a revelation they'd never see coming. Over the next hour, I worked like a silent storm, photographing documents, copying messages, even overhearing plans that could shatter reputations and topple fortunes. Each piece of evidence layered onto the last, forming a damning mosaic of betrayal. Every secret they so carefully kept. Betrayals of friendship, underhanded financial schemes, whispered promises broken, was mine to expose. When the hour struck party's height, I slipped away to the library wing, heart still pounding. The room was dim, swathed in burgundy and oak. I spread the papers and photos on the grand mahogany table, watching as the dam of my anger swelled. I thought of every moment Seraphine had sneered at my research, how she dismissed my bookish victories as trivial, how she flaunted her life of ease in my face. My pen hovered over the first page of the speech I'd prepared. I'd planned to reveal everything at the crescendo of her party, the perfect public reckoning. My voice would be steady, clear. I would name names, present evidence. No one would doubt me. And then, I would watch as the guests recoiled in shock, as Seraphine's perfect facade cracked. But as I readied myself, a quiet voice in my mind warned me. Power is a dangerous thing. Once unleashed, it cannot be contained. Still, the thrill of justice surged through me, a tide I could not resist. I tucked the files back into my coat and smoothed my breath. It was time. I returned to the courtyard just as the lights dimmed for the evening's toast. Seraphine stood beneath the lanterns, her sapphire gown glowing in the half-light. She raised her crystal glass and the crowd hushed. I pressed my back against a column, clutching the files like a talisman. This was my moment. Without warning, the courtyard projector blinked off, and the giant white screen behind Seraphine lit up with images. Documents, photographs, voice recordings, all evidence of her secrets, flickered in stark clarity. Gasps rippled through the guests. Seraphine's smile froze. My chest tightened as I stepped forward into the pool of lantern light, files held high. Every eye turned to me. I opened my mouth to speak. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. Quote, "The courtyard fell into a hush so complete I could hear the rustle of silk gowns like whispered secrets. My heart stuttered for a moment, then surged with purpose. Lantern light danced across Seraphine's face, illuminating shock in her sapphire eyes. Guests froze mid-sip, mid-gasp, their expressions a mosaic of disbelief. I stepped forward, files clutched in one hand, my voice low but carrying through the silent garden. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, each word deliberate, you've come to celebrate Seraphine's engagement, but tonight, you're also here to witness the truth." A faint murmur rippled through the crowd, as hushed as the breeze threading through the trellis. I raised my chin, recalling every insult Seraphine had hurled, every slight I'd endured. "Behind her perfect smile lies a web of deception," I said, turning to face the projector screen. A series of emails appeared, correspondence between Seraphine and our cousin Henrietta, detailing how our family business was being siphoned off before the Swiss merger. Lines highlighted in crimson showed Seraphine's orders to inflate invoices and redirect funds. Gasps echoed like thunderclaps. Lady Cantrell clutched her pearls. Lord Shaw's face paled. His jaw trembled as he read allegations that he'd been an unwitting pawn in Seraphine's scheme. I advanced to the next slide, a voicemail recording, Seraphine's voice crisp and cold, mocking her best friend's innocent enthusiasm over which vintage wine to serve. "Don't flatter yourself," she sneered. "This party exists for me, not for your amateur palate." The recording ended in a brittle laugh. An anguished cry cut through the crowd. Seraphine's fiancé stumbled back, eyes wide with betrayal. The quartet stopped playing. A single violin string quivered before snapping silent. My pulse thrummed in my ears. The moment had arrived. The dam had burst. I closed my binder and folded my arms. "I know what it means to be underappreciated," I said softly, voice resonant with conviction. "I am tired of living in your shadow." A hush fell over the courtyard once more, an expectant stillness, pregnant with revelation. Then, from the edge of the crowd, a voice, "My sister spied on me." I inhaled sharply, fighting the urge to smirk. Seraphine's composure was fracturing, her carefully curated image unraveling in real time. In that moment, I realized the power of truth, and how quickly it could topple even the strongest facade. Footsteps sounded behind me. I turned to see Henrietta, eyes wide with fear, fingers pressing against her lips as if to muffle her own gasp. She shook her head, tears sparkling in the lantern glow. Behind her, a hush had fallen that felt infinite. Then, softly, a sound, the snap of a branch, the sigh of the wind. The storm had begun. And at that moment, I knew I had changed. No longer the silent archivist, I was the herald of reckoning, my story unleashed. The first raindrop fell like a cold tear, splattering against the marble fountain. Within seconds, the gentle shower transformed into a torrent, sheets of silver water cascading over stone and silk alike. Guests scattered beneath canopies, panicked shrieks mixing with the crash of thunder. Lanterns swayed on their chains, their flames flickering rebelliously against the storm. I squinted through the rain, each droplet streaking across my vision like stained glass. Seraphine stood frozen under the trellis, her gown plastered to her like a second skin. Her hair, once arranged in perfect waves, now clung to her cheeks in damp clumps. Shock had given way to rage, her lips twisted in a silent scream. Momentarily, the chaos around me dissolved. I felt the sharp gust of wind, the cold slap of rain on my face, and the taste of iron on my tongue, fear and exhilaration rushing in tandem. This was no longer about exposing secrets. It was about survivability, about navigating the storm I had unleashed. I lifted my chin and strode through the courtyard, rainwater pooling in the folds of my charcoal coat. Guests darted past, clutching dripping shawls, while servants struggled to wrestle folding chairs upright. Yet every eye lingered on Seraphine and me, sisters locked in an unspoken duel as thunder roared overhead. I skirted the fountain, the water swirling around the pedestal like a miniature whirlpool. Memories flashed unbidden, Late-night library sessions, hushed arguments over ledger discrepancies, Seraphine's mocking laughter echoing down corridors. But those were before I claimed my power. A sudden bolt of lightning illuminated the sky, freezing the courtyard in stark contrast. In that split second, I saw Henrietta stumbling toward me, mascara streaked down her cheeks, her eyes swollen with tears. "Helena," she cried, voice cracking. She clutched a soaked envelope in her hand. "She's accusing me of leaking the merger documents. She thinks I'm the traitor." I caught her arm, steadying her. "Show me," I shouted over the wind. The envelope spilled open, releasing papers saturated with rain. I fished out a slim sheet, a signed affidavit that pinned the blame squarely on Henrietta's shoulders. My pulse thundered. This was bigger than I realized. Seraphine's plan wasn't only about the family business. She'd orchestrated a false trail to eliminate her rivals, friends, confidants, even blood relatives. "Go find safety," I urged Henrietta, voice urgent. "Head for the library wing. The servants' entrance is around the east wall. I'll handle this." She hesitated, eyes wide with dread, then nodded and fled toward the main house. I watched her go, chest heaving. Alone, I faced Seraphine, the storm, and the assembled guests. With deliberate calm, I strode back to the projector screen, now flickering erratically in the downpour. I reached into my coat and produced another recorder, my final ace. "This," I called out, voice steady, "is the confession you'll wish you'd never heard." Before I pressed play, a familiar figure emerged from the shadows. Lord Everett Shaw, Seraphine's fiancé, drenched and furious. He grabbed my arm with surprising strength, pulling me close. "You think you've won," he hissed. "This is my family's reputation at stake." His breath was hot despite the cold, his grip unyielding. I met his gaze, defiance burning in my chest. "You helped her," I spat. "You knew exactly what she was doing." Everett's eyes flickered, a hint of guilt, or was it fear, darting across his face. He hesitated, as though my words pierced him deeper than any sword. Thunder rolled, punctuating the silence. In that charged moment, the projector behind him sparked back to life, illuminating my next slide. The projector's blaze cut through the deluge, casting ghostly silhouettes across the drenched courtyard. The slide flickered into focus. A video clip capturing Everett's private confession. His voice, low and tremulous, spilled into the night. "Helena," the recording began, "if Seraphine's plan succeeds, we stand to gain everything. You know our family's debts. Her scheme will wipe them clean. You help me bury this and I'll make you partner in every venture. Refuse and you're ruined." Gasps erupted. The guests recoiled as one, a living portrait of betrayal. Lady Cantrell's mouth gaped. Henrietta's sobs echoed from the manor corridors. Seraphine's lips twisted into defiance, but her eyes gleamed with panic. Everett released my arm, stumbling back as though struck, his face drained to ashen white. I stepped forward, rainwater dripping from my hair. "So, it wasn't just about the merger," I said, voice rising above the storm. "This was personal, a calculated gambit to erase debts and consolidate power." Seraphine's chest heaved. "You think you've beaten me? I created you," she hissed. "Everything you are, everything you achieve. It's because I acted first. Without me, you'd be nothing." I glanced at the projector. Next to Everett's confession lay a series of financial records, hidden accounts, shell corporations, offshore investments. Names of prominent dignitaries and business magnates blurred in the downpour. Guests whispered like frightened birds. The courtyard was a tempest of gasps and murmurs. I turned back to my sister, resolve burning. "I'm no longer your shadow. I'm the light that shows every hidden corner." I clicked the recorder off, letting the silence hang heavy. Then, with a steady hand, I ripped the final slide from the projector. A list of demands pinned against a blood-red border. Immediate restitution to every defrauded party, public apology, and the resignation of both Seraphine and Everett from any claim to the family legacy. Seraphine lunged forward, reaching for the papers, but my grip was faster. She yanked at the parchment. I felt the scent of rain-slick paper and adrenaline as we struggled. "Give it back," she screamed, her fury undiminished by the storm. I held the papers above my head, beyond her reach. Above us, lightning split the sky, illuminating her desperation like a scene from a Gothic painting. Then, a new voice rang out, a voice colder than the rain. Enough. All eyes turned as a figure emerged from beneath the gallery eaves. Our grandmother, Matilda Braithwaite, regal even in her silken nightgown, a diamond brooch glowing in her hair. She surveyed the tableau, Seraphine's wild hair plastered to her forehead, Everett's trembling form, the scattered guests, and raised a single hand. Silence fell like a weight. "Helena," she said, her voice wavering with a power that cut sharper than any blade, "you've done well. But some stories are not yours to end." My heart leaped. Grandmother's arrival was a turning point. Her approval meant everything. I met her gaze, unflinching. The rain slowed, as though the storm itself awaited her decree. And then, the first crackle of thunder since her appearance. The storm was not yet over. Ellipsis. Grandmother stood at the edge of the courtyard, her silhouette framed by flickering lanterns and quivering shadows. Her gaze swept the drenched assembly, brow arched in austere command. "Matilda," I began, voice steady despite the roar of the storm. I wanted to ensure everyone knew the truth. Her lips curved into a thin smile, and she stepped forward, each footfall measured across the soaking stone. "The truth," she murmured, "is a lantern in the dark, but wield it poorly, and it burns everything around it, including yourself." A gust of wind tore through the courtyard, extinguishing several lanterns, plunging pockets of the scene into inky blackness. Guests clustered under trees and canopies, their faces pale in fear. I squared my shoulders. I understand the danger. But these people, I gestured at the crowd, deserve to know who they celebrate. They deserve honesty. Grandmother's gaze softened an instant, as though she recognized a younger version of herself in my resolve, yet caution lingered in her eyes. "Caution, my dear," she said. "Even justice demands wisdom. You risk more than your reputation here." At her words, Seraphine's shoulders slumped, defeat glimmering in her eyes for the first time. But before I could respond, another figure emerged. Lord Shaw's cousin, Lord Marcus Pennington, a financier known for his icy pragmatism. He sloshed forward through ankle-deep water, offering a soaked hand to Seraphine. "Enough theatrics," he barked. "We have lost enough time to this spectacle. Reveal your terms." He pointed to the parchment clutched in my hand. "Or I'll ensure you pay dearly. Everyone on that list will lose everything." Marcus's words dripped with menace. The guests murmured in agreement. Their anxiety had shifted from curiosity to outright fear. I exchanged a glance with grandmother. She nodded imperceptibly. "Very well," I said, voice calm. "Restitution begins now. All misappropriated funds will be returned, apologies made, estates restored to rightful heirs." I watched Marcus's expression thunder, his plan unraveled. Seraphine, silent, pressed her lips together, eyes downcast. The storm intensified, rain battering the courtyard in pulses. Lightning forked across the sky, synchronized with the crescendo of voices rising in protest and praise. I lifted a fistful of the parchment. "And for my part," I continued, "I will assume control of the records and accounts to ensure transparency. The Braithwaite legacy will survive if built on truth." Marcus's jaw clenched. He flexed white-knuckled fingers. But before he could strike back, grandmother's voice rose over the storm. "Silence," she commanded, and the wind obeyed, stilled as if the night itself awaited her decree. "Helena," she said, stepping beside me, "your sister has much to atone for, but you have shown restraint and mercy. That is true strength." Power shimmered in her words. The guests bowed their heads in respect. Thunder rumbled low in approval. I felt the weight of the moment settle around me, a quiet victory tempered by the storm's afterglow. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. The air hung heavy with anticipation as the storm began to relent, leaving behind a breathless hush. Drops still clung to the leaves, sliding in slow rivulets toward the cobblestones below. Lanterns flickered back to life as the wind died, casting a soft glow over the wet courtyard. I lowered the parchment, heart still pounding with adrenaline. Grandmother's eyes met mine, a silent affirmation passing between us. Behind her, Seraphine remained by the trellis, shoulders drooped, eyes fixed on the ground as though each raindrop marked her shame. Marcus stepped forward, boots squelching in puddles. He regarded me with an inscrutable expression, as if gauging whether I was friend or foe. His gaze passed over the parchment, now a soggy testament to betrayal and restitution. "Braithwaite," he said, voice low, "this changes everything. If you uphold your promise, the family business will flourish. But break it." His words trailed off, but the threat was unmistakable. I drew a steady breath. "You have my word. No one will suffer again. I will oversee every ledger, every contract. Transparency is non-negotiable." A murmur of approval rippled through the guests. Some faces, once masked in shock, softened with respect. Others remained cautious, but hope had been sowed in that courtyard. I turned to grandmother. "Thank you," I whispered, voice thick with gratitude. She offered a small nod. Seraphine finally raised her head, tremors in her frame. Her voice was barely audible, muted by the damp night. "Helena," she began, but I cut her off gently. "No, Seraphine," I said, approaching her with measured steps. "There's nothing left to say here." Her eyes filled with tears. Regret, humiliation, acceptance. For a moment, I glimpsed the sister I once knew. Vulnerable, afraid, lost in her own ambition. Outside the courtyard, the manor's windows flared with torchlight, servants peering curiously at the scene. Some had gathered archways, exchanging nervous glances. The scandal had reached every corner of our estate. I placed a hand on Seraphine's shoulder. "You helped me find my voice," I said softly. "Now it's time for you to find your own." She nodded, eyes bright with unshed tears. A distant rumble announced the retreat of the storm. Above, clouds parted to reveal a moon, pale and watchful, illuminating the courtyard in silver. The quartet, wet but determined, resumed their positions near the ivy archway. One violin screeched in an unfinished note, then they struck up a solemn melody, as though in tribute to the night's revelations. I glanced at the assembled guests, remembering the tasks ahead, rebuilding trust, restoring fortunes, and preserving the family legacy. The journey would be long, but the first step had been taken. Grandmother cleared her throat, calling attention. "Let us retire to the manor," she intoned. "We have much to discuss and much to repair." I followed her, Seraphine at my side. As we passed under the arch, the lanterns caught the droplets in midair, turning them into a cascade of diamonds. Once inside the grand hall, warmth enveloped us, a stark contrast to the storm outside. Tapestries hung along the walls, depicting generations of Braithwaites engaged in triumph and tragedy. The fireplace crackled, its flames dancing with golden light. Guests drifted toward velvet sofas and carved chairs, some trembling, others relieved. Servants silently offered towels and brandy, moving with practiced efficiency. I found a seat beside grandmother at the head of the table. She poured us each a cup of steaming tea, the fragrant steam curling between us. "My dear," she said quietly, "tonight you did what few could. You exposed deceit without cruelty, demanded justice without vengeance." Her words filled me with pride and humility. I raised my cup in silent thanks. The manor doors creaked shut behind us, sealing out the remnants of the storm. In that moment, I felt the weight of responsibility settle on my shoulders, and the thrill of forging a new path. The night stretched before us, long and uncertain, but for the first time I felt truly alive. Ellipsis. Dawn broke in muted shades of pewter and rose, the sun's first hesitant rays filtering through the tall, mullioned windows of the Braithwaite Manor. The night's storm had passed, leaving the courtyard slick with rain and strewn with fallen petals and broken lanterns. I stood at the top of the grand staircase, the weight of responsibility and triumph settling on my shoulders like a mantle. Below me, family and guests gathered in the conservatory, a vast glass pavilion warmed by the fireplace's glow. Tables lined the walls, laid with heavy brass candlesticks and crystal decanters. Servants moved silently, refilling teacups and passing trays of buttery scones and fresh fruit. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and warm pastries. I descended slowly, every step echoing through the marble hall. Grandmother awaited at the foot of the stairs, her posture straight as a pillar, an unspoken sign that my presence was both expected and judged. As I reached the bottom, she inclined her head. "Helena," she said, voice gentle, "it is time to chart a new course for the Braithwaite legacy. Your leadership will shape the future." A ripple of applause swept the room. Seraphine sat beside Marcus Pennington, her face calm, her expression unreadable. Everett Shaw lingered near a window, arms folded, watching me with a mix of awe and lingering resentment. I approached a long oak table at the center of the room, covered in maps, ledgers, and official documents. The largest map depicted the Braithwaite estate's lands, manor grounds, farmlands, tenant houses, and the small vineyard I had persuaded grandmother to invest in. I placed my hand on the parchment, tracing the borders. "We begin with transparency," I announced, voice carrying over the hush. "From this day forward, all accounts will be open for inspection. I'll host weekly assemblies to review finances, discuss plans, and address concerns. No more hidden ledgers, no more secret schemes." I gestured to Marcus. "Lord Pennington, your expertise in finance will be invaluable. Together, we'll ensure our operations are not only profitable, but ethical." He nodded curtly. "I'll draft the new charter and distribute it tonight." Seraphine rose, pale but composed. "And what of my role?" she asked, voice steady though her hands trembled. I turned to her, tender sympathy in my chest. "You will assist in community outreach and estate relations. Use your social talents to mend bridges with our tenants and allies." Quote. She inhaled sharply, relief mingled with determination. "I'll do whatever it takes." From the back, grandmother's voice chimed in. "Our tenant farmers await resolution on the floods last season. We must allocate funds to repair the levees and distribute aid." I nodded. "Already scheduled. I've arranged meetings with the local council to secure grants and volunteers." The assembly buzzed with cautious optimism. Outside, the sky brightened to a clear blue, promising a new beginning. Yet beneath the surface, I sensed unfinished business. The scandal had shaken us, but the true test lay ahead. Rebuilding trust, addressing old grievances, and forging unity. Later that morning, I slipped away to the family archives, a wood-paneled room at the rear of the manor, lined with shelves of leather-bound tomes and vellum scrolls. I lit a single candle and spread blueprints on a mahogany desk. Plans for reforming our tenant contracts, a proposal for a public archive open to the villagers, and designs for a memorial commemorating the reconciliation we'd achieved. My quill scratched across parchment as I drafted letters to local dignitaries, scholars, and philanthropists, plants for cultivating alliances, seeds for our new era. A soft knock sounded at the door. Seraphine entered, her hands folded in front of her. She brushed a rogue strand of hair behind her ear, her gaze steady. "How can I help?" she asked, voice sincere. I folded the letters. "I need your insight on the memorial's design. I want it to honor both our family's heritage and the community's spirit." She smiled, genuine this time. No pretenses, no rivalries. I'd be honored. Together, we pored over sketches. A fountain surrounded by flowering dogwoods. A cobblestone plaza inscribed with names of those who suffered and those who persevered. As midday light slanted through the stained glass, illuminating our shared purpose, I realized that despite the chaos of the past days, something rare and powerful was blossoming, unity forged from adversity. But even as hope stirred, shadow lingered, whispers of dissent among distant relatives, rumors of financial backers balking at transparency, and the lingering question of how the wider world would judge the Braithwaite rebirth. I returned to the archive's doorway, looking out at the sunlit courtyard. The path ahead would be fraught with challenges, but armed with truth and guided by mercy, I felt ready to face whatever lay beyond the gates. Ellipsis. Beyond the gates of the Braithwaite estate, the morning mist curled around the hedgerows like spectral fingers, reluctant to relinquish the memory of last night's storm. I paused at the threshold, the air crisp with promise and latent tension. The manor's ancient oak doors swung silently behind me as I stepped onto the dew-laden drive. A solitary carriage waited at the circular forecourt, its polished black lacquer almost lost in the soft gray haze. Marcus Pennington stood beside it, examining a ledger with grave intensity. At his side, a group of tenant farmers in worn woolen jackets and mud-spattered boots clustered, their faces etched with curiosity and the cautious optimism that had begun to blossom. "Miss Braithwaite," Marcus greeted, eyes flicking upward. Rain had matted my hair, and the collar of my coat bore flecks of mud from the courtyard's puddles. Yet I carried myself with the calm authority I had claimed in the debates of yesterday. "Lord Pennington," I replied, voice steady. "Are they ready?" He nodded, handing me the ledger. The worn pages bore meticulous notations, debts forgiven, reimbursement schedules, and new contracts drawn with clarity and fairness. Each line represented a life shifted, a promise restructured. The farmers exchanged glances. Then one, Samuel Devereaux, a weather-worn man with silvery hair and kind eyes, stepped forward. He extended his hand, roughened by toil. "For years we've lived under fear of arbitrary rents and secret fees," Samuel said, voice thick with emotion. This is new. It's what we asked for but never dared expect." I clasped his hand. "You have my word. The Braithwaite estate exists to serve its people, not the other way around. These contracts will be honored, and any grievances will be heard in weekly councils." A murmur of approval rippled through the group. Their relieved smiles were as bright as the dawn breaking above the rolling hills. I turned to Marcus. "Let's begin the signings." He barked a quick instruction to the servant, who had emerged from the manor with writing materials. Within minutes, tables were arranged under a makeshift canopy, parchment unfurled and quills poised. As the farmers signed their names or marked the X of their thumbprints, I moved among them, offering words of reassurance. Each handshake, each nod reaffirmed the bond that had been frayed but not broken. When the last contract was sealed, I gathered the group. "Today we rebuild," I declared, lifting my voice above the soft rustle of the morning breeze. "Together we will plant new crops, rebuild the levees, and restore this land to its full promise." They raised their caps in salute, and I felt the first spark of unity take root. Watching them depart toward the fields, I noticed Seraphine arriving on the balcony above, her hands gripping the railing. Her gaze followed the farmers, her expression one of introspection. I nodded, and she offered a small, grateful smile. Then she disappeared inside, presumably to prepare the manor for the day's council. Marcus unfolded his ledger. "Next," he said, "we should address the investors from London. They expect an update on the wine venture and assurances about financial transparency." The vineyard. I had nearly forgotten the silent rows of vines on the eastern slope, a project grandmother had greenlit before the scandal erupted. The sun, now climbing above the horizon, coaxed droplets of dew from the leaves, making them glisten like emeralds. I turned toward the distant slopes. "Let's walk," I said, beckoning Marcus to follow. We moved across the estate grounds, leaving behind the formal procession of contracts. The morning air was cold but bracing, filling my lungs with resolve. As we ascended the hill, the manor receded behind us, its turrets and chimneys etched in silhouette against the clearing sky. We passed through the vineyard's border, a low stone wall draped in ivy, and stepped among the vines. "The investors will be here by noon," Marcus noted, scanning the rows. "They'll want a tasting, a presentation of projected yields, and confirmation that our accounts are open." I knelt to brush soil from a cluster of unripe grapes. "Everything's prepared," I said. "We'll present balance sheets, honest forecasts, and open our cellars for them. If they balk, we'll let Seraphine's social grace persuade them, or grandmother's reputation." He allowed a rare smile. "You've thought of everything." I straightened, looking across the vineyard's gentle terraces. "We have to. There's no turning back now." Our conversation was interrupted by a sudden clamor from below, the thunder of hooves on gravel. We turned as a procession of riders approached, the Yorkshire militia, led by Colonel Edward Hawthorne, a family friend and retired army officer. Hawthorne dismounted in a swirl of dust and crisp morning light. His uniform was immaculate despite the early hour, medals gleaming on his chest. "Miss Braithwaite," he greeted, voice booming yet welcoming. "I trust I'm not too late for council?" His sharp eyes studied us as though appraising a battlefield. I inclined my head. "Colonel, your presence is welcome. We were just preparing for the investors." He nodded, glancing at Marcus. "I'll provide security for the meeting, ensure protocol is maintained. But I suspect you need more than muscle. You need counsel." His gaze shifted to the vines. Word of last night's revelations spread fast. "Some investors may view the scandal as Pandora's box. You need confidence." I met his gaze, determination flaring. "Then let's give them confidence." We descended toward the manor together, an alliance forged in the sunrise's glow. Farmer, financier, soldier, and me, the unlikely architect of a new Braithwaite era. Inside the manor, the great hall was transformed. Twin tables bore crystal decanters of wine, polished oak chairs arranged for the investors. Portraits of ancestors looked down upon us, their painted eyes eternal witnesses. Seraphine appeared, her gown an understated damask silk in sage green. She offered lace-trimmed handkerchiefs to nervous guests and greeted each arriving investor with poised grace. Her transformation from socialite to steward had begun, her role reborn. I stepped to the dais, clearing my throat. Investors fell silent, curiosity flickering in their eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, heart steady, voice clear, "welcome to Braithwaite Manor. Today, we embark on a venture rooted in truth and guided by integrity. Let us begin." From the back, the wind whispered through open windows, carrying the promise of rain washed away and new growth ahead. I met the investors' gazes, confidence shining in mine. The future unfolded before us. Uncertain, yes, but ours to shape. The investors settled into their chairs, the polished oak beneath them still cool from the night's rain. Crystal glasses clinked softly as servants poured the first measure of Braithwaite vintage, a pale gold liquid that shimmered like captured sunlight. I rose from the dais holding a decanter and offered it with a calm smile. "This wine," I began, my voice resonating through the hall, "is a testament to resilience. These vines endured frost, flood, and the weight of neglect, yet here they stand, yielding a harvest that speaks of perseverance and promise." Quote, glasses were raised, and the first slow sips rippled around the table. Investors exchanged impressed glances. Some murmured approval, others nodded thoughtfully. I allowed the moment to linger, letting the harmony of appreciation settle the last of their doubts. Once the tasting concluded, I guided them to a long table draped in green velvet, dotted with ledgers and charts. Marcus stood by my side, ready to explain the data. "Our projected yields," he said, pointing to a column in ink, "reflect a conservative estimate, accounting for weather variances and market fluctuations. The accounts," he tapped the open ledger, "are accessible to you at any time, online or in person. No hidden entries, no surprises." An elderly gentleman, Lord Baxter of Whitford, leaned forward, spectacles perched on his nose. "Miss Braithwaite, these figures are impressive. But tell me, what safeguards do you have in place to ensure continuity? A single misstep could undermine confidence." I exchanged a glance with grandmother, seated at the far end of the table, her silent nod a lifeline. I stepped forward. "We've established a governance council," I said, gesturing to a printed charter at each place setting. "Composed of a rotating board, 2 representatives elected by the tenants, 2 appointed by the investors, and 1 Braithwaite family member, myself, in the first term. We meet monthly to review operations, audit expenditures, and address any grievances." The room hummed with approval. Even Marcus allowed a small smile. I continued, "Additionally, we've contracted an independent auditor, Sir Richard Huxley, whose trial audit will be published in the Estate Gazette, a monthly bulletin distributed to every household on the property." Whispers of praise followed. Laughter, even light and genuine, filled the space. As the meeting adjourned, I guided Lord Baxter and others on a tour of the estate grounds, showing them the newly built levee reinforcements, the communal granary that Seraphine had helped fund, and the lean-to shelters erected for seasonal laborers. At each site, I introduced them to tenants, faces now open with gratitude. The afternoon sun glinted off the crops and stone walls, casting long shadows that danced with the breeze. The investors seemed renewed, their previous skepticism washed away under the clarity of our vision. But as I walked the rows of barley with Lord Baxter, I sensed a flicker of wariness in his eyes, a silent question that remained unspoken. How would we handle inevitable setbacks? It was a valid concern, the unspoken truth of every venture. I recalled grandmother's words by the fountain. Power was a dangerous thing. And I recognized that assuming control did not guarantee success. It only promised responsibility. That evening, I returned to the archives to draft a contingency plan, a blueprint for crisis management that would outline protocols for drought, market collapse, or another scandal. The candle's flame trembled as I wrote. Section 1. Emergency Fund Allocation. 5% of annual profits reserved for immediate disbursement in case of natural disaster or economic downturn. Section 2. Crisis Council Activation. When triggered by any board member or tenant representative, the Crisis Council convenes with 24 hours to propose and implement remedial measures. Section 3. Public Communication Protocol. All statements to be approved by the Governance Council and distributed through the Estate Gazette and local press. Section 4. Succession Measures. In the event of incapacitation or death of any council member, the board appoints a temporary replacement until the next election. As the clock chimed midnight, I sealed the scroll and tucked it into the archive chest. The weight of foresight settled on me, a heavy but necessary burden. In the hush of the manor, I sensed movement behind me. Seraphine stood in the doorway, her face illuminated by moonlight and candle glow. "You've thought of everything," she murmured, stepping into the room. I turned, offering a weary but proud smile. "That's the price of leadership." She crossed to my side, her hand slipping into mine, a silent partnership renewed. "We'll face whatever comes," she said softly. I nodded, eyes drifting to the window where the first stars of dawn beckoned, heralding both challenge and opportunity. "Together," I affirmed. Outside, the estate lay quiet, the night air trembling with anticipation. And though uncertainty stretched ahead like a winding road through the mist, for the first time, I believed we would navigate it, one honest step at a time. Morning mist still curled above the dew-kissed lawns as I stood on the terrace, overlooking the newly erected Memorial Plaza. The flowering dogwoods I and Seraphine had designed bloomed riotously, their pale petals drifting in the breeze like confetti. Yet beneath the serenity, my mind churned with the weight of yesterday's investor meeting and the looming council session. Grandmother had summoned a special gathering of the Governance Council at 10 o'clock, an unprecedented early hour. As I pocketed my gloves and turned to enter the manor, I caught sight of a familiar figure striding toward me, Lady Evelyn Carrington, a distant cousin and longtime critic of the Braithwaite reforms. "Helena," Evelyn began, voice smooth as polished marble. "May I have a word?" She gestured to a wrought iron bench beneath a rose arbor. I nodded and followed her, mindful of the council waiting within. Once seated, Evelyn offered a thin smile. "I congratulate you on the progress thus far. But I must ask, how do you intend to address the dissent among some of our steadier tenants? Word is spreading of unrest in the northern hamlet, claims that the new weekly councils are little more than window dressing." I met her gaze. "I've already scheduled a visit next week to their community hall. The tenant representatives and I will convene their first open forum. I intend to listen, learn, and act on any substantive grievances." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Actions speak louder than words, Helena. Ensure your promises aren't broken by bureaucracy." Then she rose, smoothing her gown. "I'll see you at the council." With that, she drifted back toward the manor, leaving me to ponder her warning. Inside, the grand hall had been transformed. Banners displaying the new governance charter hung alongside family crests, and a long table bore fresh parchment and quills. The council members, 2 tenant representatives, 2 investor delegates, grandmother, Marcus Pennington, and Seraphine, waited expectantly. Grandmother tapped her ornate cane on the stone floor. "Council is in session," she intoned. "First order, reports on tenant outreach." Margaret Hale, the elder tenant representative, stood. Her voice was firm, seasoned by years of hardship. "Our community meeting in Ashwood went well, but several farmers raised concerns about delayed seed shipments." They felt the approval process for requisitions was too cumbersome. She produced a stack of signed petitions. Marcus exchanged a glance with me. I rose. I apologize for any delays. Effective immediately, I will designate a liaison officer, someone from the tenant community, to coordinate seed orders and expedite approvals. We'll simplify the requisition form and set a 2-day turnaround. Margaret's stern features softened. That would be most welcome. Next, investor delegate Lord Baxter requested an update on the contingency fund's status. I presented the ledger summary. 5% of last season's profits secured and ring-fenced. His nod confirmed confidence, though his eyes hinted at lingering scrutiny. Grandmother then turned to Seraphine, Estate Relations Report. Seraphine rose, her measured grace undimmed. We've arranged a charity fair for next month, partnering with the local orphanage. Proceeds will fund scholarships and infrastructure improvements on the estate. She displayed detailed plans for booths, performances, and a silk embroidery exhibit showcasing tenant artistry. As Seraphine spoke, a hush settled, a moment of pure collaboration between sisters. I recognized the power of shared vision and unconditional support. With the scheduled business concluded, Grandmother looked to me. Any further matters? I hesitated, then spoke of Evelyn's concerns. I propose adding a clause to expedite decisions on urgent tenant needs. We'll define thresholds for rapid council votes. I outlined a draft amendment on parchment. Marcus reviewed it, nodding approval. Even Grandmother allowed a hint of a smile. As the council adjourned, I felt both exhaustion and exhilaration, the twin burdens of leadership. Outside, the sun had fully emerged, casting golden light across the rose petals and banners. I stepped onto the terrace again, breathing deeply. Ahead lay meetings with the northern hamlet, preparations for the charity fair, and the ever-looming possibility of political maneuvering by skeptical relatives. Yet, I felt ready, guided by truth, buoyed by family solidarity, and driven by the community's trust. I would continue forging the Braithwaite legacy, one honest decision at a time. The afternoon sun slanted through the east-facing windows, illuminating the fleur-de-lis tapestry hanging above the council table. The warmth it offered did little to dispel the chill that lingered in the marble halls. After the spring council, I retreated to my chambers, determined to draft the agenda for tomorrow's visit to Ashwood and the northern hamlet. Yet even as I outlined discussion points, flood mitigation updates, agricultural grants, improved road repairs, my mind wandered back to Evelyn Carrington's cautionary words. Her warning had echoed in my thoughts. Actions speak louder than words. I wondered if I'd set too many plans in motion without ensuring the proper support structures. Before I could dwell on doubt, the door to my study creaked open. Seraphine entered, a stack of invitations clutched to her chest. Helena, she said, voice soft but earnest, I've drafted letters to the regional press about the charity fair and our new scholarship fund. I thought we could review them together. I smiled, grateful for her unwavering support. Of course, I replied, smoothing the parchment on the desk. We spent the next hour fine-tuning the language, emphasizing community benefit, historical legacy, and transparent stewardship. Seraphine's delicate handwriting contrasted with my bold script, a harmonious blend of sisterly collaboration. As twilight approached, I donned my writing habit and sought out Colonel Hawthorne in the courtyard. He was overseeing the training of the militia volunteers we'd enlisted to assist with flood control efforts and estate security. His stern face softened when he saw me. Colonel, I greeted, offering a curtsy in front of the drill yard. How are the preparations? He paused, eyes tracing the line of recruits drilling with wooden poles. Discipline is improving, but morale wavers. Many joined for the prestige, not the labor. I could use your presence at their midday briefing. Hear their concerns, boost their spirits. I nodded. I'll gather them after morning prayers. The next day, I stood before the militia in the sunlit yard, their uniforms crisp, yet faces weary. I spoke of honor and service, of protecting the land that nourished them. I announced that after the Ashwood visit, they would receive medals for their dedication, and that local blacksmiths would forge badges commemorating their service. I saw determination spark in their eyes, and by the end of the address, they saluted with renewed vigor. With recruitment and training stabilized, I rose early the following morning for the journey northward. The carriage rattled over cobblestone roads as Seraphine and I traveled toward Ashwood, the morning mist transforming fields into mist-wreathed phantoms. Along the way, we passed cottages with thatched roofs, children waving from doorsteps, and farmers tending plowed rows. Arriving at the Ashwood Community Hall, a modest, timber-framed building, I was struck by its humble dignity. A group of hamlet elders stood on the porch, their expressions cautious. After brief salutations, we entered the hall, where dozens of villagers awaited, their eyes reflecting years of skepticism. I opened the meeting with gratitude and humility. I recounted the council's decisions on seed requisitions and levee repairs, presenting along with Seraphine a ledger summary and timeline for delivery. I invited questions, and to my relief, concerns were direct but fair. Fears about delayed mail deliveries, requests for medical supplies, and appeals for a proper school teacher. Each issue, though outside the estate's traditional purview, touched a chord in me. I committed to raising the mail concern with the Crown's Postal Service and to reallocating a portion of the relief fund for a traveling physician. As for the school, I proposed inviting a retired tutor from the manor to teach in Ashwood 2 days per week, with Seraphine organizing the curriculum. The villagers buzzed with approval, and the meeting closed with a communal potluck, where I shared local bread and cheese, forging bonds over simple fare. That evening, back at the manor, I reviewed the day's achievements with grandmother. She listened intently, nodding as I outlined the action items: a letter to the postal minister, recruitment of a physician, and Seraphine's teacher appointment. Grandmother placed a gloved hand on mine. "Helena," she said softly, "you have balanced vision with empathy. That is rare." Relief and pride surged through me, yet I remained mindful of the road ahead. Trade negotiations with London merchants scheduled for next week, the upcoming university lecture tour I'd planned to raise funds for the village school, and secret rumors that the Duchess of Pembroke might seek to retract her patronage if financial reports did not meet her expectations. As I withdrew to my study beneath the turret, I could not quell a sense of foreboding. The empire of our family's reputation was expanding beyond the estate's borders. Greater reach meant greater risk, diplomatic missteps, political rivalries, and the ever-present specter of scandal. Yet for every shadow there was light. The community hall's warmth, the malicious salute, Seraphine's laughter echoing in the corridors. I realized that leadership was not the absence of fear but the courage to persist despite it. Tomorrow's dawn would bring new challenges. But armed with experience, guided by truth, and buoyed by unity, I felt prepared to meet them head-on. Writing the next chapter in the Braithwaite Chronicle, one honest decision at a time. The following morning dawned clear and bright, the manor's spires and chimneys sharply etched against the pale blue sky. Birds trilled in the gardens below as I descended the staircase, anticipation and purpose coalescing in my chest. Today's agenda was formidable, finalizing preparations for the Duchess of Pembroke's patronage confirmation, coordinating the traveling physician's arrival, and presiding over the first session of the university lecture tour that would fund the Ashwood School. I paused in the grand hall, where servants were placing brass lanterns and arranging vases of early spring blooms, daffodils, hyacinths, and budding roses. Sunlight streamed through stained glass, painting the floor in kaleidoscopic colors. Grandmother awaited, seated near the hearth, her silver hair gleaming in the morning light. "Good morning, my dear," she greeted, her voice soothing as warmed honey. "You look as ready as the Braithwaite family's ever been." I offered a curtsy. "Thank you, grandmother. I trust the letters reached the Duchess?" She nodded. "Her reply arrives by courier at noon. Meanwhile, your physician arrives on the midday coach, and Professor Ellington awaits you in the library for your lecture." I swallowed, excitement mingling with nerves. The university circuit was uncharted territory for a Braithwaite woman, yet the cause, securing educational resources for our tenants' children, was worthy of the challenge. First, urgent business, the Duchess's visit. By late morning, the manor's east wing buzzed with activity. Servants polished silver, arranged seating in the rose garden, and laid silk cushions on wrought iron benches. Seraphine oversaw the floral arrangements, ensuring lavender and peonies complemented the Duchess's emerald gown. I slipped outside, smoothing my jade green riding habit. The air smelled of lilacs and fresh hay. Grandmother joined me, her cane clicking softly on the flagstones. When she arrives, she advised, focus on our shared values: patronage, philanthropy, and the Braithwaite legacy. Let your conviction shine. Moments later, the Duchess of Pembroke's carriage drew up under the portico. The Duchess herself emerged, her regal bearing undiminished by the brisk walk. Her gown, emerald silk embroidered with gold, caught the sunlight, and her sapphire-encrusted tiara glinted like a crown of stars. "Miss Braithwaite," she greeted, her voice refined but warm. "Your invitation was most intriguing." I met her gaze, bowing deeply. "Your Grace, it's an honor. The Braithwaite estate stands to benefit greatly from your guidance." We strolled through the rose garden, petals brushing our skirts. I spoke of the Ashwood School's needs, presenting detailed cost analyses and proposed curriculum plans. The Duchess listened intently, her expression thoughtful. "Your passion is admirable," she said after a pause. "Philanthropy must balance heart and mind. I will consider a donation of £500 and support your university lectures, but I must see evidence of impact." I offered her a bound volume of letters from Ashwood villagers, grateful testimonies, drawings by schoolchildren, and sketches of the planned schoolhouse. She opened it, leafing through pages with delicate fingers. "These voices speak volumes," she murmured, closing the book. "I am persuaded. Expect my letter of patronage by week's end." Relief flooded me. I curtsied, gratitude nearly overwhelming my composure. The Duchess inclined her head and departed, leaving behind a flurry of servant activity. I exhaled, turning to grandmother. "It's done," I whispered. She smiled, pride shining in her eyes. With the Duchess's commitment secured, I moved to the courtyard to await the coach from London. At precisely 12, a battered yet dignified coach pulled up, and Dr. Catherine West stepped out, a tall woman with spectacles perched on her nose and a leather satchel slung over her shoulder. "Miss Braithwaite?" she asked, extending a gloved hand. "Yes, Dr. West. Welcome to Braithwaite Manor." I helped her gather her instruments, chests of medicine, surgical tools, and volumes of medical texts. As I escorted her inside, Seraphine appeared with tea and pastries. "I've prepared the Northeast Wing as your clinic," she said. "The levy workers will appreciate your care." Dr. West's eyes brightened. "I'll begin rounds immediately." Quote, I departed to the library, where Professor Ellington, a distinguished scholar from Oxford, waited amidst towers of books. He adjusted his pince-nez and cleared his throat. "Miss Braithwaite," he began, "your topic today?" "A discourse on ethical leadership," I replied, voice steady, using the Braithwaite reforms as a case study. We arranged chairs along long tables, each topped with notebooks, quills, and ink pots. Seraphine moderated refreshments, offering stollen, scones, and local cheese. I stood before the assembled students and townsfolk, farmers, artisans, tenants' children, my pulse steady. Drawing a breath, I opened my lecture. Ethical leadership begins with truth. It demands transparency, accountability, and empathy. It is built not on privilege, but on the willingness to serve. As I spoke, I felt the weight of every challenge overcome and every path yet taken. The library's vaulted ceiling shimmered overhead, and the expectant faces before me became the living future of the Braithwaite legacy. When the session concluded, applause echoed through the hall. Questions followed, deep inquiries about governance, civic duty, and personal accountability. I answered each thoughtfully, aware that every word carried the weight of the family name. Late that afternoon, as dusk draped the manor in twilight hues, I reconvened with Seraphine and grandmother by the hearth. The day's accomplishments had been many: Duchess's commitment, Dr. West's arrival, and the lecture's success. Grandmother poured Madeira wine, raising a glass to our endeavors. "To Braithwaite," she toasted, her voice a soft echo of history. I clinked my glass, then set it aside, eyes on the hearth's flames. "Tonight," I said, "we celebrate progress. Tomorrow, the next chapter begins." The glow of embers reflected in our eyes, a promise of unity, courage, and the unending journey of honest leadership. The dawn of the new week arrived with the muffled clatter of rain against the leaded glass windows, a soft percussion that seemed to echo the steady rhythm of my racing thoughts. I stood in the anteroom outside the library, my reflection blurred in the polished mahogany door. In my hands rested the revised university lecture tour schedule, a meticulously organized plan that would carry our message of ethical stewardship to the learned halls of Oxford, Cambridge, and beyond. Yet beneath the crisp lines and neat columns lay an undercurrent of unease. Only yesterday, I had secured the Duchess of Pembroke's patronage and welcomed Dr. West's arrival. Today, I would address the academic elite and rural gentry in equal measure. A gentle cough drew my attention. Seraphine emerged, her embroidered shawl draped over one arm, concern in her dark eyes. "How are you feeling?" she asked softly. I offered her a small smile, meeting her gaze with steady resolve. Ready, though I confess, I find myself wondering how our truths will be received in Marble Hall and the cloistered quad. She reached out, placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "They will listen. You've built a foundation of honesty and action. That speaks louder than any speech." Her words soothed a tight knot in my chest. I tucked the lecture notes into my satchel and allowed her to guide me into the library's grand chamber. Professor Ellington stood at the podium, adjusting the candlelight to illuminate his spectacles. Behind him, the shelves towered like silent sentinels. The assembled auditors, fellows in black gowns, young scholars in prim velvet caps, and a handful of local dignitaries, quieted as I took my place. Drawing a breath, I addressed the room. "Esteemed colleagues, honored guests, I stand before you not as a scion of privilege, but as a steward entrusted with the welfare of an entire community." My words flowed, each sentence woven with tales of flood-ravaged fields, bright-eyed children awaiting the first lessons, and the quiet dignity of tenant farmers who dared to hope once more. I presented the framework of our estate's governance council, detailed the crisis contingency measures, and illustrated the tangible impact of the Duchess's patronage on the Ashwood School's curriculum. As I spoke, I watched expressions shift, from polite curiosity to genuine engagement. A professor in the front row leaned forward, brow furrowed in thought. A young student scribbled notes with fervor. When I concluded with a call for collaboration between the academic world and rural leadership, the applause that rose was warm, not perfunctory. Afterward, during the Q&A session, queries ranged from the logistics of rotating tenant elections to the feasibility of replicating our model in other estates. I answered each question with candor, acknowledging the imperfections in our first months and outlining precise steps for refinement. When the final question was posed by Dr. Harriet Locksley, the renowned economist whose critique of landed reform was equally feared and respected, I braced for confrontation. "Miss Braithwaite," she said, voice deliberate, "your transparency is commendable, yet how do you address the inherent imbalance of power? Even a fair contract exists within the context of landlord privilege. Can true equity ever be achieved?" Her words pierced the silence. I paused, choosing my reply with care. "Dr. Locksley," I began, "I will not deny the shadows of our history. Privilege cannot be erased by decree. Equity must be earned through ongoing accountability, shared governance, mandated audits, and the empowerment of every voice at our tables. True balance emerges not when we equalize land ownership overnight, but when we ensure that every decision reflects the collective interest, whether tenant, investor, or family." A murmur of agreement rippled through the hall. Dr. Locksley inclined her head, a quiet nod that I took as both challenge and affirmation. The afternoon light waned as I gathered my notes. The university lecture tour had begun on a high note, but I knew that the real test lay in sustaining momentum. Each castle, each hall, each new audience would demand its own blend of conviction and empathy. Later, Seraphine found me in the courtyard, where the first golden leaves of autumn drifted on a chill breeze. "Well done," she said simply. I allowed myself a rare moment of rest, closing my eyes to savor the crisp air. Yet even as relief mingled with pride, my mind roamed ahead, to trade negotiations in London, to the charity fairs opening at Ashwood, and to the whispered rumors of an impending inquiry by the Duchess's advisors. But for now, in the glow of a speech well delivered, and the promise gleaming in the scholar's eyes, I felt the Braithwaite story pulse with life. Late autumn mist clung to the Braithwaite Manor's ramparts, painting the stone in ghostly hues as I navigated the twisting corridors toward the solar chamber. My satchel, heavy with correspondence from London merchants and denials from skeptical in-laws, swung against my hip. Today's mission: negotiate trade agreements for our wool exports and secure backing for the upcoming charity fair in Ashwood. I paused at the carved oak door marked Council of Commerce, where Seraphine waited, scrolls unfurled in her hands. Her expression was focused, no hint of the socialite I once knew. "Everything ready?" she asked, voice hushed. I laid out the merchant letters on the rosewood table. Proposals from Yorkshire wool traders, demands from the Bristol Shipping Syndicate, and an insistent telegram from the Scottish cloth merchants seeking direct supply. Each document represented both opportunity and risk. "Gentlemen arrive by carriage in an hour," Seraphine said. "We must present a united front." I nodded, smoothing the stack of papers. "Let's review our priorities: fair pricing, transparent ledgers, and guaranteed delivery schedules. Emphasize our governance council's oversight." She tapped a bullet point chart. "And don't forget the bonus clause: profit sharing with tenant cooperatives. That's our edge." We arranged the chamber's benches and cleared the hearth's embers to make room for the negotiating table. Lanterns glowed in anticipation. Soon, boots clattered in the hallway, and 4 merchants filed in: Sir Alistair Whittaker of Bradford, Lady Penrose from Bristol, Master Douglas Kerr of Edinburgh, and newcomer Mr. Edmund Hale from Liverpool. Each wore the confident carriage of commerce, but their eyes betrayed curiosity at the unusual setting. I rose to greet them. "Welcome to Braithwaite Manor. I am Helena Braithwaite with my sister Seraphine and our family council here to discuss trade terms." They exchanged polite bows. Sir Whittaker's voice, gravelly with years of wool dealing, broke the formalities. "Miss Braithwaite, your reputation for reform precedes you. Let us see if your principles translate into profit." I gestured to the ledgers. "Our estates produce 20 bales per acre this season, with consistent quality grades. We propose a base price of 8 shillings per bale plus a percentage bonus tied to monthly market rates." Lady Penrose raised an eyebrow. "Profit sharing with tenants? Unheard of. What assurance do we have that yields will remain stable?" I clicked to reveal a chart: crop rotation schedules, soil restoration initiatives led by our tenant representatives, and lease incentives for best harvest yields. Beside it, crisis fund projections demonstrating financial resilience in drought scenarios. The merchants murmured. Master Kerr consulted his ledger. "Sensible," he said slowly, "but the shipping syndicate demands a minimum annual commitment. We need at least 500 bales to justify freight." Seraphine stepped forward, voice calm. "We've calculated yields, and the council is prepared to guarantee that volume. Additionally, we'll allocate a special reserve from autumn flocks to cover shortages." Mr. Hale nodded thoughtfully. "Very well. And what of delivery?" "We require timely dispatch to maintain our weaving schedules." I smiled. "Our new river barge route, supervised by Colonel Hawthorne's militia volunteers, ensures fortnightly shipments directly to Liverpool docks. No hidden fees, clear manifests, and oversight by an independent auditor." Sir Whittaker leaned back, absorbing the details. After a tense moment, he extended his hand. "Miss Braithwaite, you've surpassed our expectations. We accept these terms." A murmur of approval rippled around the table as the other merchants consented. Contracts were drawn, quills dipped, and seals pressed into wax. As the meeting concluded, I felt the weight of each signature, a promise of prosperity balanced by the duty to keep every word. The merchants departed under bowing heads, lanterns bobbing through the dusk. I exhaled, turning to Seraphine. Another barrier crossed. She smiled, relief brightening her features, and still so much to do. Outside, the manor grounds lay swathed in twilight. Beyond the walls, Ashwood's lamplit windows beckoned, promising the laughter of children in the schoolhouse and the hum of preparations for the fair. I knew the path ahead would demand equal parts resolve and compassion. But tonight, trade secured, I allowed myself a moment of quiet triumph before the next dawn's challenges beckoned. The soft glow of dawn filtered through the high windows of the great hall as I stood before the ornate arched doors, chest tight with anticipation. Today marked the opening of Ashwood's first annual charity fair, a culmination of months of planning, community outreach, and tireless negotiation. Seraphine and I had poured our hearts into this event, determined to transform it into more than a mere spectacle, a testament to the strength of unity and the generosity of purpose. I stepped inside, my skirts whispering against the polished stone floor. Tables draped in vibrant cloths lined the hall. One bore baskets of freshly baked bread and pastries prepared by the manor's bakers. Another displayed woven shawls and embroidered linens crafted by Ashwood's artisans. Nearby, a long table was heaped with produce: crimson apples, pale pears, and baskets of early winter squash from the estate's fields. At the far end, Seraphine stood beneath a carved oak beam, greeting guests with gracious smiles and guiding them toward the floor's centerpiece, a large wooden stage adorned with garlands of holly and rosemary. From here, local performers, a choir of village children, and a quartet of fiddlers would offer entertainment throughout the day. I took a moment to let the scene wash over me, the laughter of children chasing each other past stalls, the hum of conversation among tenants and townsfolk, and the bright eyes of investors and dignitaries as they sampled the offerings. "Helena," Seraphine called softly, drawing me beside her. She wore a deep burgundy gown that contrasted with her pale features, her hair braided in an intricate crown. "They're arriving." I followed her gaze to the entrance, where a procession had formed. Dr. West, in her crisp coat, carrying a satchel of medical supplies for the infirmary tent. Colonel Hawthorne, medals glinting beneath his coat, leading the militia volunteers who would oversee the event's safety. Marcus Pennington, adjusting his gloves with an appraiser's eye, and, to my delight, Lord Baxter and Lady Penrose, arriving hand in hand to offer their continued support. My heart lifted at the sight, each arrival a testament to the connections we'd forged. I crossed to greet them, offering each a cordial bow. "Lady Braithwaite," Lord Baxter said, voice warm as he accepted a cup of spiced cider. "What a marvelous undertaking." "And so well executed," Lady Penrose added, gently touching a holly garland's leaves. "It feels like the spirit of the village has awakened." I smiled, glancing at Marcus, who gave a subtle nod of approval. "It belongs to them now," I said quietly. "Every penny raised today goes directly to the school fund and to repairing the flood defenses." Marcus offered a brief salute. "I'll ensure the accounts reflect the day's proceeds by nightfall." I led the group toward the stage, where a hush fell as I stepped up to the podium, a polished oak lectern carved with the Braithwaite crest. Clearing my throat, I addressed the assembly. "Friends, neighbors, esteemed guests," I began, voice clear and resonant. "Welcome to Ashwood's first charity fair. This day is more than celebration. It is a promise of hope for every child who will learn in the schoolhouse built from your generosity, and for every family whose fields will be safeguarded by levees strengthened through your compassion." Quote. Applause rippled through the crowd as I paused, letting the sincerity of the moment settle. Today, I invite you to partake in the talents of our community, taste our harvest, admire our crafts, and above all, share your goodwill. For unity is the greatest legacy we can leave. As I stepped back, the choir began singing a hymn of gratitude, their clear voices lifting the rafters. The fair sprang to life in earnest. Coins clinked in donation boxes, customers haggled playfully over handicrafts, and children thronged the games booth, their laughter echoing with the swish of ribbons and the rattle of wooden hoops. Throughout the day, I moved among the stalls, praising a weaver's deft fingers, comforting an elderly tenant who expressed concern over her winter rations, and kneeling beside young James Abernathy to tie his new scarf before he rushed off to join the choir. By midday, the medical tent saw Dr. West tending to scrapes and colds, while the militia volunteers escorted late arrivals from the carriage house. Professors from the university circuit mingled with farmers, sharing notes on crop yields and educational methods. As the sun dipped toward the west, lanterns were lit, casting a golden glow over the stone floor. I made my way back to the stage for the day's highlight, the announcement of the fair's total proceeds. The crowd gathered, breath held in anticipation. With a gentle nod to Seraphine, who held the ledger aloft, I announced, "Thanks to your generosity, we have raised £1,500, enough to complete the schoolhouse, establish a scholarship fund, and finance the levee repairs for next season." A roar of cheers erupted, followed by tears of joy and embraces shared between neighbors. I stepped down from the podium, my vision blurred by emotion. In that moment, I felt the culmination of every secret exposed, every contract renegotiated, and every risk taken. The Braithwaite legacy had been reborn not through wealth or power, but through the shared resolve of a community united by truth. As the evening's bonfire was lit outside, spears of flame dancing against the dark sky, I stood beside Seraphine, our hands clasped. "We did it," she whispered. I nodded, letting the warmth of the fire and the hope in every face fill me. Tonight, the path ahead glimmered with possibility, and though challenges remained, I knew we would face them together. Ellipsis. The morning after the charity fair dawned crisp and clear, the manor grounds humming with the quiet aftermath of celebration. Ashwood's villagers had returned to their homes, the laugh-filled stalls dismantled and stacked neatly in the courtyard. Lanterns still lined the path to the schoolhouse, their flames guttering gently in the soft breeze, a reminder of the triumph of yesterday. I stood at the edge of the rose garden, dew-laden petals brushing my skirts, as Seraphine approached carrying a ledger. Her expression was thoughtful, tinged with the relief of success in the weight of the tasks yet to come. "Helena," she said, offering the ledger, "here are the final tallies. We've already dispatched the funds to begin construction on Ashwood School's foundation, and the scholarship endowment is established in trust." I took the ledger, skimming the entries. Donations, expenses, allocations, every penny accounted for. A surge of pride welled in my chest, but I forced myself to remain grounded. Yesterday's victory was only the beginning. "Excellent," I replied, meeting Seraphine's gaze. Now we turn to the final phase, the university certificates, the commemorative ceremony, and the publication of the first issue of the Estate Gazette. Seraphine nodded. "I've drafted the Gazette articles, an introduction by grandmother, a guest column by Lord Baxter, and coverage of the fair's highlights." She paused, brow furrowing. "One more thing. There's been word from London's legal counsel about allegations from distant relatives contesting the new inheritance charter." My heart skipped a beat. The northern branch of the Braithwaite clan, always envious of our prominence, had seized upon the changes to challenge the legitimacy of grandmother's reforms. If left unchecked, their lawsuit could undermine our governance council and stall every initiative. I drew a breath, steadying myself. "We anticipated resistance," I said quietly. "Fetch the legal briefs. I'll prepare a response, invoking the council's ratification and the Duchess's patronage letter. We'll need affidavits from tenant representatives and investor delegates to testify to the fairness of our process." Seraphine offered a small, determined smile. "I'll gather them at once." I watched her depart and turned inward, toward the manor's archive wing. The corridor was lined with ancestral portraits, grim-faced patriarchs and matronly ancestors, their eyes seeming to judge my every step. I paused before grandmother's portrait, the matriarch's stern gaze softened by streaks of time. "Guide me," I whispered. "Help me protect the truth." In the dusty vault, I found the legal counsel's sealed letters, pages of verbose argumentation, claims of broken tradition, and threats of court injunctions. I broke the seal and read the accusations. That grandmother's unilateral changes violated statutes of entail, that tenant votes held no bearing on noble inheritance, and that investor interests could not supersede bloodline rights. My pen hovered above a blank parchment. I drafted a formal rejoinder. To the Honourable Court of Devonshire, we, the duly constituted Braithwaite Governance Council under the charter ratified by a quorum representing the family, tenants, and investors, present this evidence of transparent deliberation and lawful amendment of precedents. Enclosed are signed attestations from tenant representative Margaret Hale, investor Lord Baxter, Colonel Hawthorne, and Her Grace the Duchess of Pembroke, affirming the integrity of the process and the community's support. The amendments serve the public good, securing the estate's future for all stakeholders. I paused, considering each clause. The letter needed both legal precision and moral weight. With a steady hand, I continued, weaving in references to the Duchy's statute supporting philanthropic amendment and to historic precedents where estates were restructured for communal benefit. By afternoon's end, the rejoinder was complete. I sealed the packet with the council's seal, grandmother's signet ring pressed into wax. As I placed it on the courier's desk, I felt a solemn resolve. The fight for our vision would not be won by charity alone, but by unwavering adherence to truth and justice. Next, I convened the council in the solar chamber. Marcus, Seraphine, grandmother, and our tenants' reps. We reviewed the letter, each voice lending authority. When at last grandmother delivered her assent, pressing her hand atop mine, I knew we were prepared to face this challenge as we did the last, united, transparent, and steadfast. At dusk, as the autumn sun set in a blaze of crimson, I stood once more on the terrace, gazing at the horizon. The manor's banners, embroidered with the Braithwaite crest, fluttered in the wind. Below, the lamps in Ashwood glowed like stars, guiding the way forward. The road ahead would be arduous. The lawsuit, upcoming fairs, and the university tour's final lectures. But fortified by yesterday's triumph and the unyielding support of every hand that had signed our charters, I felt ready to meet whatever storms the future might bring. The first frost of winter had settled across the Braithwaite estate, frosting the window panes of the manor in delicate filigree patterns. As dawn's pale light filtered through, I rose before sunrise, the weight of the pending lawsuit heavy in my mind. Today, the Council of Commerce would convene again, this time alongside legal counsel and grandmother's advisors, to finalize our response to the challenges issued by the northern branch of the family. I dressed in a tailored wool coat of deep forest green, fastening the silver clasps at my throat with methodical care. Seraphine had chosen a matching scarf in cream wool, and she joined me in the anteroom, her expression composed yet tense. "We must stand united," she said quietly, smoothing the folds of my coat. "They cannot divide us if we show an unbreakable front." I nodded, fastening the last clasp. Lines of frost formed where my breath escaped. "We've prepared every affidavit, the Duchess's patronage letter, Margaret's testimony, Colonel Hawthorne's declaration, the investors' endorsements. We have the law on our side." Seraphine offered a small, determined smile. "Then let them come." We descended the grand staircase to the council chamber, where Marcus Pennington was already reviewing documents with our legal team. The oak table was strewn with parchment, wax seals, and the thick volumes of family statutes. The fire crackled low in the hearth, its warmth offsetting the chill that permeated the room. Grandmother sat at the head of the table, her gaze fixed on the documents before her. Beside her, our solicitor, Mr. Haversham, adjusted his spectacles as he organized the bundle of evidence. "Miss Braithwaite," he began, voice calm but firm, "the petition challenging the charter alleges violation of entail statutes, claiming that tenant elections cannot alter succession rights. We have gathered precedents where similar reforms were upheld by referencing the public benefit clause and the doctrine of local consent." Quote. He spread out copies of legal texts. The 1721 Devonshire Reform Act, which permitted amendments for public welfare, the 1798 Landholders Amendment, which recognized tenant councils, and the more recent 1843 Charities Revision Act, which explicitly endorsed philanthropic estate restructuring. I leaned forward, scanning the texts. We'll highlight the sections that affirm the council's authority and emphasize how our reforms align with statutory precedents. Then we'll prepare a summary for the judge. Mr. Haversham nodded approvingly. "Exactly. We will file by midday. However, they've requested an injunction hearing, scheduled for tomorrow. You must be prepared to present oral arguments." At the far end, Marcus tapped a ledger. "Our investor endorsements are here. They've signed declarations supporting the legality and necessity of the reforms." I took a sealed packet and placed it beside the statutes. The documents felt weighty, sealed pages holding the future of the estate, and I exhaled, steadying myself. Grandmother raised her hand, drawing silence. The assembled council bowed their heads. "My dears," she began, voice strong, We face this challenge not as adversaries but as guardians of our legacy. The Braithwaite name has stood for centuries because it adapted and served the greater good. Today, we reaffirm that legacy. A murmur of assent rippled around the table. I was struck by the unity, each face resolute, aligned in purpose. Proceed with the filing, grandmother continued, and tomorrow I shall attend the hearing with you. Let them see that this is not merely my granddaughter's project, but a family commitment. As the meeting adjourned, I gathered the bundles, my thoughts turning to the path ahead, the injunction hearing, the potential press scrutiny, and the delicate balance of preserving community trust while defending against familial claims. Outside, the sky had turned silver and gray, a thin veil of snow beginning to drift downward. I met Seraphine's gaze across the courtyard. In that fleeting moment, before duty called us once more, I saw not only my sister but my partner in every endeavor. Tomorrow, she said, voice resolute, we fight for the truth. I nodded, watching as the first flake landed on her scarf. Together. Quote, and so, beneath the gentle cascade of winter's breath, we prepared to defend all we had built, with the law at our backs, the community by our side, and the unwavering strength of the Braithwaite spirit guiding us forward. The morning after our strategic council meeting dawned with an unseasonal chill that crept through the manor's stone corridors and settled in my bones. Frost crusted the window panes, and the torches in the entry hall flickered as if uncertain whether to burn. Even the ever-reliable tapestries seemed muted, their once vibrant colors dulled by the hush of winter's breath. I dressed in my heaviest cloak, its fur-lined collar a small comfort against the cold, and made my way to the solar chamber where Marcus Pennington had convened the Council of Commerce to review our contingency plans in light of the injunction hearing scheduled for midday. The chamber doors opened at my gentle rap, revealing Marcus, grandmother, Seraphine, and Colonel Hawthorne already seated around the oval table. Mr. Haversham, our solicitor, stood at the center, flanked by two legal clerks handling parchment scrolls. Good morning, Helena, Marcus greeted, voice steady. We've received confirmation that the court hearing will occur in 2 hours at the Devonshire Hall. The judge, Lord Chancellor Harrington, expects oral arguments strictly by 11 a.m. I nodded, smoothing the fur on my cloak. Then we must depart without delay. Our affidavits and precedents are in Mr. Haversham's briefcase. Grandmother leaned forward, her expression firm. Remember, this is as much a public demonstration of our truth as it is a legal proceeding. The villagers and investors alike watch us, awaiting reassurance. We must be impeccable. Seraphine offered a determined smile. I'll prepare the carriage. Colonel Hawthorne will escort us. He inclined his head. Security and protocol will be maintained. No surprises. We filed out into the frosted courtyard, the biting air cutting through my cloak. The carriage was already harnessed, militia volunteers in crisp uniforms standing guard. Snowflakes drifted down silently as I settled onto the leather seat beside grandmother. The journey along the winding country road was hushed. Winter's stillness seemed to magnify every sound. The crunch of hooves, the low rumble of the carriage wheels, the sharp intake of breath as I reviewed my notes. The solicitor, seated across from us, unfolded the key points. The 1721 Devonshire Reform Act, the Landholders' Amendment of 1798, and the Duchess's patronage letter as a de facto testament to community benefit. As we approached Devonshire Hall, a neoclassical building of white stone and fluted columns, torches illuminated the portico, flames flickering against a slate-gray sky. A small crowd had gathered, tenants led by Margaret Hale, investors including Lord Baxter, and curious villagers bundled in wool cloaks. I caught sight of Marie Abernathy among them, her daughter clutching a braided wool scarf. Their hopeful faces bolstered my resolve. Inside, the hall's antechamber was a study in austere grandeur, marble floors, high ceilings, and a regal portrait of Lord Chancellor Harrington gazing down. Court clerks moved swiftly, beckoning us through oak doors atop a short dais. The main chamber was filled with the hush of anticipation. Rich tapestries lined the walls, and at the far end sat Lord Chancellor Harrington, flanked by 2 associate justices. A long bench faced him, where the petitioners, the northern relatives, sat in solemn rows, their solicitor whispering urgencies into their ears. Mr. Havisham rose and approached the bench, presenting leather-bound volumes of evidence. I followed, offering my reverent bow. Your Lordship, Mr. Havisham began, voice resonant. We present this case on behalf of the Braithwaite Governance Council, documents ratified by a quorum representing tenants, investors, and family. Legal precedents underscoring the legitimacy of estate reform for public benefit, and the explicit patronage letter from Her Grace, the Duchess of Pembroke, affirming communal support. He paused, allowing the gravity of his words to settle. The judge's steely gaze shifted to me. I stepped forward, cloak trailing softly on the marble. Your Lordship, I began, voice firm, I am Helena Braithwaite. Yesterday I stood at the helm of this estate, guided by truth and duty. The North Branch's petition argues that inheritance statutes cannot be amended without unanimous bloodline consent. But this estate's purpose extends beyond lineage. It encompasses the lives of tenants whose livelihoods depend on our stewardship, and the investors whose capital sustains our ventures. Our charter is not an act of caprice, but a covenant anchored in statutory provisions dating back centuries that empower landholders to restructure for the common good. Quote, a hush fell. Below, my sister Seraphine and grandmother watched with solemn pride. Outside, I glimpsed Margaret Hale nodding in affirmation. The judge tapped his gavel. Continue. I presented my next argument. The documented lack of dissent among tenant representatives, the unanimous votes from investor delegates, and the explicit letters from the Duchy and local council endorsing our reforms. I spoke of the public benefit clause, of the moral imperative to protect communities, and of the tangible results already achieved, levee repairs, the school's foundation, and transparent governance. When I concluded, the associate justices exchanged glances. Lord Chancellor Harrington's expression remained inscrutable. After a brief recess, he delivered his ruling. This court finds that the Braithwaite Charter, as ratified by a legally constituted council, stands within the bounds of precedent and statute. The injunction is denied. A roar of quiet relief rippled through our supporters. Seraphine clasped my hand, tears glistening in her eyes. The petitioner's solicitor bowed curtly, while the northern relatives rose in stunned silence. Outside, the winter sky glowed as if in celebration. I stepped into the courtyard, the cold air invigorating. The crowd cheered softly, their trust validated. Yet as I surveyed the faces before me, loyal tenants, steadfast investors, and our own kin, an uneasy thought surfaced. Though we had won this battle, the war for hearts and minds across the wider world had only begun. The future lay vast and uncertain, but fortified by this victory, I felt prepared to lead the Braithwaite legacy forward into whatever storms might yet arrive. Winter's grip began to loosen as a pale sun climbed above the horizon, melting frost into rivulets that glinted like silver threads across the Braithwaite courtyard. The morning air carried the promise of renewal, and with it, the weight of the final challenges of the season. I stepped into the crisp breeze, resolve stealing my spine. Today marked the 19th chapter of our journey, consolidating the estate's reforms into enduring tradition and preparing for the summit at Cambridge, where our model would be presented to the network of British landholders. Seraphine waited beside the ivy-covered fountain, steaming teacup in hand. Her gaze was steady, lined with the lessons of the past months. Helena, she said, voice low, news from Cambridge. They've invited you to speak at the Winter Assembly of Landed Gentry next week. They want case studies, outcomes, and actionable guidelines. She paused, measuring me with sisterly concern. Are you ready for that stage? I lifted my chin, the morning sun reflecting in my eyes. I've never been more ready. But we must ensure that our documentation is flawless. I'll review the compiled report with grandmother this afternoon, then draft the presentation. My mind ticked through the remaining tasks, finalizing the first issue of the Estate Gazette with winter editions, overseeing the concluding repairs on the Ashwood levee, and ensuring Dr. West's medical services were woven into the next year's estate plans. Inside the manor's warmth, grandmother presided over a small circle in the solar chamber. Seraphine, Marcus, Colonel Hawthorne, Dr. West, and our legal counsel. Scrolls and ledgers lay open, a testament to every reform enacted. Grandmother's voice, though softer than usual, carried the authority that had shaped our course. "You have built not only a legacy, but a template," she said, "one that must now be codified for posterity." I took the journal from Seraphine's hands, a leather-bound volume inscribed with the Estate Gazette's inaugural issues. The charcoal sketches of the charity fair, the ledger's summaries of Ashwood's school fund, and the transcripts of tenant testimonies gleamed on its pages. I turned to the last blank pages and began drafting the foreword, a summary of our trials, the guiding principles of transparency, and the call to other landholders to place community welfare at the heart of governance. The afternoon passed in a whirl. I met with Dr. West to discuss her request for an expanded infirmary in the northern hamlet, assigning Seraphine to source funding through philanthropic subscriptions in London. I reviewed the final survey maps of the levee reinforcements, nodding in approval as Colonel Hawthorne reported completion ahead of schedule, and I sat with Marcus as he formatted the Cambridge presentation slides. Data visualizations of yield improvements, graphs of revenue growth balanced against community investments, and thematic maps illustrating our governance. Evening found me on the terrace, the last light of day melting into the horizon's lavender glow. Seraphine joined me with 2 steaming mugs of spiced cider. We stood side by side, gazing at the lamps in Ashwood flickering like distant stars. "Tomorrow," she murmured, "we finalize the Gazette's winter edition and send it to print. After that, we prepare for Cambridge." Her breath formed small clouds in the cooling air. I nodded, wrapping my hands around the warmth of the cider. "And then we'll share our story. Not as a solitary triumph, but as a beacon for others." She sighed contentedly, her faithful companion in this odyssey. "You've turned our family's storms into something beautiful." I smiled, eyes on the distant glow of the village. We've done it together. As the stars emerged, I felt the closeness of the final chapter. Just one more morning before our departure. One more gathering to unite the council and community in shared purpose. The path had been long, fraught with betrayal, challenge, and relentless storms. Yet from the darkness, we had crafted a new dawn, one that would reach far beyond Braithwaite's gates. And so, as lanterns guttered and soft winds carried the promise of spring, I prepared to step onto the stage at Cambridge, carrying with me the voices of every tenant, the trust of every investor, and the enduring truth that had guided our every step. The dawn of departure was a symphony of soft light and trembling anticipation. Carriages were readied in the courtyard, their polished wheels glinting beneath a sky awash with pale blue. The manor's banners fluttered gently in the morning breeze, as though whispering farewells. I stood at the carriage steps, satchel at my side, heart thrumming with the weight of this final journey. Cambridge awaited, the culmination of every choice, every risk, and every truth we had unearthed. Seraphine appeared beside me, her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders, eyes bright with unshed tears and fierce pride. Grandmother joined us, stooped but unbowed, her silver hair glinting in the dawn light. Marcus Pennington, Colonel Hawthorne, Dr. West, and Margaret Hale formed a guard of honor, each face a testament to the alliances we had forged. "Remember," Grandmother whispered, placing a gnarled hand on my arm, "this is more than a speech. It is the voice of every tenant, every investor, and every family member who believed in our vision." Her gaze held mine, unyielding. I drew a deep breath. "I will honor their trust." Quote. Seraphine pressed a small leather-bound booklet into my hand, the final issue of the Estate Gazette, a compendium of our reforms, lessons learned, and guidelines for others to follow. Its pages bore the signature of every council member and the seal of the Braithwaite crest. As the carriage door closed, I gazed back at the manor, its stones resonating with the echoes of our journey. Then, with Seraphine's gentle nudge and the rumble of carriage wheels, we set forth down the winding drive. The road to Cambridge stretched before us, rolling hills dotted with fields newly tilled and cottages glowing with morning hearths. Along the way, we passed Ashwood's schoolhouse, its foundation laid and walls rising in the dawn. I imagined the laughter of children within, learning lessons born from our labor. At Cambridge, the university's Gothic spires pierced the sky like stone fingers reaching for heaven. The carriage deposited us at the entrance to King's Hall, where the winter assembly of landed gentry gathered in grand formality. Peers and scholars in velvet and ermine processed beneath banners and chandeliers, their murmurs echoing off stained glass windows. I ascended the dais, Seraphine and grandmother flanking me. Before us sat a sea of faces, dukes, earls, viscounts, and commoners alike, each one awaiting guidance, precedent, and inspiration. Taking my place at the lectern, I opened my notes. Esteemed peers, honored scholars, and fellow stewards of the land, I stand before you not merely as Helena Braithwaite, but as the collective voice of a community bound by truth and guided by justice. In the months since our reforms began, we have witnessed the power of transparency transform skepticism into solidarity, betrayal into renewal, and privilege into stewardship. My words flowed, weaving the narrative of our 19-part odyssey, Seraphine's betrayal and my revelation, grandmother's intervention, the storm's fury and the courtyard's reckoning, the forging of a governance council, the charity fair's triumph, the legal challenges and our victory before the Lord Chancellor, and the unity that emerged from adversity. I presented data, yields and revenues balanced against community funds, the construction timeline of Ashwood School, and the first printed run of the Estate Gazette, distributed to every household. Slides illuminated the gallery, aerial maps of our estate, portraits of tenant representatives, and quotes from voices now empowered. Faces in the audience shifted from polite curiosity to engrossed engagement. When I spoke of the moral imperative, that landholding was not a birthright to hoard, but a responsibility to uplift, the hall grew hushed, as though every soul was leaning toward the hearth of hope I had ignited. Questions followed. How to replicate tenant elections in estates of different size? How to engage investors without compromising vision? What safeguards ensured that philanthropic reforms would endure beyond a single generation? I answered each with candor, citing precedents, admitting our early stumbles, and emphasizing the need for ongoing councils, audits, and community education. When the final voice rose, a baroness whose estates bordered the northern branch's lands, I recognized a challenge reflective of our earliest trials. She asked, "Miss Braithwaite, your model shines in these halls, but can it endure when faced with envy, power struggles, and the fickle tides of politics?" I paused, recalling the faces of every tenant who had dared to hope, every investor who had granted trust, and my sister standing beside me, bound by shared purpose. "Your ladyship," I replied, "endurance is not granted by decree, it is forged through vigilance." Our model endures because we anchored it in transparent governance, community voice, and moral accountability. We meet every challenge, not with secrecy, but with open councils. We face every envy, not with retribution, but with shared prosperity. And above all, we remember that our stewardship belongs to those we serve, land, people, and future generations alike. A hush fell, then applause swelled like a rising tide. I felt the legacy of the Braithwaite name illuminate a new path for all who held land as a charge, not as a prize. As I stepped down, peers approached with handshakes and questions, their expressions transformed by possibility. Outside, Seraphine embraced me, tears of pride and relief shining in her eyes. Grandmother rested a hand on my shoulder as we departed the hall. "You have honored our lineage," she whispered. "Now, let the world be your canvas." The evening sky glowed with lanterns as we rode back to the manor, a procession of carriage lamps like distant stars guiding us home. And though exhaustion weighed on every bone, my heart soared with the promise of dawns yet to come. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.